At first, nothing appears to have changed. The room is the same. The air feels the same. The sounds outside move in their usual rhythm. To a human eye, everything looks normal, but the dog knows, not in words, not in clear thoughts. In feeling, it begins with something subtle. A shift so small that it cannot be seen directly. The dog lifts its head slightly, ears turning in a way that suggests attention without a clear target. The body becomes still, not out of rest, but out of awareness. Something is different. The dog cannot explain it. It cannot point to a single source, but its senses, far more sensitive than human perception, have already registered a change, a scent that does not belong, a tone in the air that feels unfamiliar, a rhythm in the environment that is no longer aligned. This is where everything begins. The dog does not panic. It observes, carefully, quietly, with a focus that narrows its attention to the present moment. The world becomes sharper, more detailed. Small sounds carry more weight. Small movements matter more. This is not fear. It is alertness. The dog is gathering information, trying to understand what has changed. At this stage, behavior may seem almost normal. The dog still moves, still responds, still interacts. But if you look closely, there is a difference in how it does these things. Movements are more controlled, pauses are slightly longer, attention is deeper. It may follow a sound that you cannot hear. It may look toward a place where nothing appears to be happening. It may stand still for a moment longer than usual, as if listening to something beyond the obvious. This is the first reaction, heightened awareness. The dog is not reacting to a visible threat, it is reacting to a shift in the environment. As time passes, this awareness begins to influence behavior more clearly. The dog may move closer to you, not in a playful way, not seeking affection in the usual sense, but seeking proximity, because you represent stability. When something feels uncertain, the dog looks for what it knows, and you are that constant. At the same time, the dog may begin to scan the environment more frequently. It moves through spaces it already knows, but with a different purpose. Not exploring, checking each corner, each doorway, each area where something could be hidden. This is not anxiety in the dramatic sense. It is investigation. The dog is trying to locate the source of the change, to resolve the uncertainty. If it cannot find a clear answer, the behavior shifts again. The dog becomes more sensitive to small triggers. A slight noise may cause a quick reaction. A movement in your body may draw immediate attention. The threshold for response lowers, because the system is already alert, ready, prepared for something it cannot fully define. This is where the emotional tone begins to deepen, not into fear yet, but into tension. The dog's body carries this tension quietly, muscles slightly more engaged, breathing slightly different, posture more prepared than relaxed. You may notice that the dog rests less deeply. It lies down, but lifts its head quickly at small sounds. It shifts position more often, never fully settling into complete relaxation. This is because the mind remains active, scanning, processing, trying to understand. Another important change appears in the dog's interaction with you. It may watch you more closely, your movements, your tone, your expression, as if looking for confirmation. Are you aware of this? Do you sense it too? This is not dependency. It is alignment. The dog is trying to match its understanding of the environment with yours. If you appear calm, it may reduce its alertness slightly. If you appear tense, its alertness increases. This connection is powerful because for the dog, your state is part of the environment. And when something feels wrong, it looks to you for meaning. As the situation continues without resolution, behavior may split into two directions. Some dogs move closer. They stay near you, follow your movements, reduce distance as much as possible. This is seeking safety. Other dogs create space. They move away, find a corner, observe from a distance. This is managing exposure. Both are valid responses. Both come from the same internal experience. Uncertainty. The dog is choosing how to handle it. Over time, if the source of the disturbance becomes clearer, the reaction sharpens. The dog may fix its attention on a specific point. The body becomes still again. But now, the stillness carries more intensity. This is no longer general awareness. It is focused attention. The dog has identified something, and it is watching, closely, carefully, ready to act if needed. But if the source remains unclear, something else happens. The dog begins to carry the feeling itself. Even without a clear object, the environment feels wrong, and that feeling stays. This is where the experience becomes internalized. The dog no longer needs an external trigger. The state exists within. This can lead to subtle changes in behavior over time. Reduced play, less curiosity, more observation. The world becomes something to monitor, not fully engage with, because something does not feel right. And until that feeling resolves, the dog remains in a state of partial alertness. But there is something important to understand. Dogs are not designed to stay in this state forever. They seek resolution. If the environment returns to normal, if the disturbance fades, the dog adjusts. Slowly, the alertness decreases, the body relaxes, the mind releases its constant scanning. But this does not happen instantly. The dog tests the environment, it checks again, listens again, ensures that the change has truly passed. Only then does it return to full calm. If the disturbance continues, however, the state persists. And over time, it becomes the new normal. The dog adapts, living with a constant layer of awareness, not overwhelmed, but never fully relaxed. This is how environment shapes psychology, through repeated experience, through patterns that define what is safe and what is not. In the end, when a dog senses that something is wrong, it does not react blindly. It follows a process: awareness, investigation, adjustment, and finally, adaptation. Each step is quiet, subtle, often invisible to those who are not paying attention. But for the dog, each step is essential, because it is not just responding to the world, it is trying to understand it, to find balance within it, to feel safe within it. And in that process, every movement, every pause, every shift in behavior carries meaning. Not random, not accidental, but precise, guided by instincts shaped over time. So when your dog suddenly becomes still, or watches something you cannot see, or changes its behavior without clear reason, it may not be nothing. It may be the beginning of this process. The moment when the dog senses that something is wrong, long before it becomes visible to you. And in that moment, the dog is already responding, already adjusting, already trying to find its way back to balance. As the feeling continues, the dog begins to change in ways that are easier to notice, but still difficult to fully understand. The quiet awareness from before does not disappear. It deepens. What started as observation becomes a state that the dog carries with it through every moment. The environment no longer feels neutral. Even in stillness, something remains unsettled. The dog moves, but with intention. Every step feels measured. Every pause has purpose. It is no longer simply reacting to what is happening. It is preparing for what might happen. This is where the emotional state shifts, from alertness into guarded readiness. You may see it in the dog's posture. The body is not tense in an obvious way, but it is not fully relaxed either. The muscles hold a quiet strength, as if always prepared to respond. The head lifts more often, the ears move constantly, adjusting to sounds that may not even reach your awareness. This is a body that is listening, even when nothing is happening. At the same time, the dog's attention becomes more selective. It begins to ignore what it considers unimportant, focusing only on what might be connected to the disturbance it senses. Familiar noises lose their meaning. Only unfamiliar or irregular signals draw a response. This is not distraction. It is filtering. The mind is conserving energy, directing focus toward what matters most in that moment. Another change appears in movement through space. The dog may choose paths more carefully. It may avoid certain areas without clear reason, or approach them slowly, stopping before entering, as if checking for safety before proceeding. This behavior is often misunderstood. It is not fear of a specific object. It is hesitation toward uncertainty itself. The dog is not reacting to something visible. It is reacting to something felt. If the feeling intensifies, behavior can become more pronounced. The dog may begin to follow you more closely, not in a relaxed, affectionate way, but in a deliberate, watchful manner, staying within a certain distance, always aware of where you are. Because you are the most stable reference in its environment. When everything else feels uncertain, the dog anchors itself to you. But there is also another possibility. Instead of staying close, the dog may choose distance, finding a place where it can observe without being directly involved. A corner, a quiet space, a position where it can see more than it can be seen. This is not withdrawal, it is strategy. The dog is managing its exposure to the unknown. Both responses, closeness and distance, come from the same internal state, the need to regain control. As time goes on, the dog's reactions to small changes become faster. A sudden noise may trigger immediate movement. A shift in your posture may draw instant attention. The gap between perception and response becomes shorter because the system is already prepared, already alert. This is where the experience begins to feel heavier, not overwhelming, but constant. The dog cannot fully relax. Even during moments that should be calm, even when lying down, even when nothing appears to be happening, there is always a part of the mind that remains active, watching, listening, waiting. This constant state affects behavior in subtle ways. Play becomes less frequent. Engagement becomes more selective. The dog may still interact, but only briefly, returning quickly to observation, because play requires release, and the dog is not ready to release. Not while something feels unresolved. Another important change appears in how the dog responds to your emotional state. Before, your mood influenced the dog. Now, it becomes critical. If you show signs of tension, even slightly, the dog's alertness increases immediately. If you remain calm, steady, and predictable, the dog may begin to soften, even if only for a moment. This interaction becomes a feedback loop. The dog reads you, you influence the dog, and together, you shape the emotional environment. This is why your presence matters more during these moments. Not just physically, but emotionally, because the dog is using you to interpret what it cannot understand. If the situation remains unresolved, the dog begins to adapt to the feeling itself. It no longer waits for the disturbance to end. It learns to live with it. This is where behavior stabilizes again, but in a different way. The dog becomes consistently alert, consistently aware, carrying the state as part of its normal experience. This is not ideal, but it is functional. The dog finds a way to exist within uncertainty, reducing extremes, avoiding constant peaks of reaction, maintaining a steady, guarded state. But if the disturbance eventually disappears, something changes again. The dog does not immediately return to normal. It tests, slowly. It reduces its alertness in small steps, allows itself to relax for short moments, then checks again, listens again, confirms that the environment is safe. Only after repeated confirmation does the state fully release. The body softens, the posture lowers, the breathing deepens. The mind lets go, and in that moment, the dog returns to balance, not because it forgot, but because it understood that the disturbance has passed. This entire process reveals something important. When a dog senses that something is wrong, it does not react in a single way. It follows a path, from awareness to investigation, to guarded readiness, to adaptation, and finally, to release. Each step is connected. Each step serves a purpose. And each step reflects the dog's attempt to maintain safety in a world it cannot fully control. In the end, the dog is not simply reacting to danger. It is responding to uncertainty, trying to make sense of a change that exists just beyond clear understanding. And in doing so, it shows a kind of intelligence that is easy to overlook. Quiet, precise, constantly adjusting, always seeking balance. So when your dog changes its behavior without clear reason, becomes more watchful, more careful, more present than usual, it may not be random. It may be this process unfolding. The moment when the dog senses something is wrong and begins to respond in the only way it knows how, by paying attention more deeply than ever before. And then there is a final stage, a stage that is not loud, not dramatic, but deeply revealing. Because after the dog has observed, investigated, adjusted, and carried the feeling for long enough, something changes inside, not in the environment, in the dog. At this point, the dog has already accepted that something is not right. It no longer questions it in the same way. It no longer searches constantly for a clear answer. Instead, it begins to live with the feeling. And this is where the deepest psychological shift happens. The dog reorganizes its behavior around uncertainty. It creates a new balance. You may notice that the dog no longer reacts as sharply as before. The quick movements, the sudden responses, the constant scanning begin to soften. But this is not because everything feels normal again. It is because the dog has adapted. The alertness becomes steady, less visible, more internal. The dog no longer needs to check every sound because it has learned to carry awareness continuously. The environment is still being monitored, but in a quieter, more efficient way. This is not relaxation, it is controlled awareness. A state where the dog is always ready, but no longer shows it outwardly in the same way. You may see this in how the dog rests. It lies down, the body appears calm, but the ears still respond to subtle changes. The eyes may close, but not deeply. There is always a part of the dog that remains present, listening, sensing, prepared. This is the body living in a world that feels slightly uncertain.
Did you
Another
hear back
important
about the
change
fence?
appears in how
No,
the dog
not
makes
yet.
decisions.
I'll call them
Before,
tomorrow.
actions were immediate, direct, confident. Now, there is a brief pause, a moment of internal check-in before movement. The dog considers, not in thought, but in instinct. Is this safe? Is this stable? Should I proceed? This pause becomes part of every action, and over time, it shapes the dog's entire rhythm. Everything becomes slightly more measured, slightly more deliberate, because the environment has taught the dog that certainty cannot always be assumed. There is also a shift in how the dog connects with you. It may still come close, still follow, still respond, but there is a deeper layer now. The dog reads you more carefully than ever before. Your tone, your posture, your energy, all of these become signals that guide its behavior. If you remain calm, steady, and consistent, the dog begins to rebuild something it lost. Not immediately, but gradually, trust. But if your signals remain inconsistent, the dog maintains its adapted state, always aware, always adjusting, never fully releasing. This is where your role becomes critical, because the dog is no longer trying to understand the environment alone. It is using you as a reference, a guide, a source of meaning, and what you show it shapes how it resolves the uncertainty. If you provide stability, the dog moves towards stability. If you reflect tension, the dog carries tension. This connection is constant, and it defines the final outcome of the process. If the disturbance eventually disappears and your behavior remains consistent, something important happens. The dog begins to let go, not suddenly, but in layers. The constant awareness softens. The pauses become shorter. The body relaxes more deeply. The mind releases its need to monitor everything, and slowly, the dog returns to a state of balance. But this balance
Hello
is not
there.
the same
Who's
as
a good
before.
boy?
It is more informed, more aware. The dog has learned something about its environment, something about uncertainty, and something about how to adapt to it. This learning stays, even after the feeling is gone. If the disturbance does not disappear, if the environment remains unpredictable, the adapted state becomes permanent. The dog lives in a constant layer of awareness, not overwhelmed, but never fully at ease. This is not because the dog is weak. It is because the environment has shaped it this way, and the dog, as always, has adjusted in order to function. In the end, when a dog senses that something is wrong, the reaction is not a single moment. It is a process, a quiet unfolding, from awareness to investigation, to tension, to adaptation, and finally, to a new form of balance. Whether that balance is calm or guarded depends entirely on what the dog experiences next, because the dog is always learning, always adjusting, always shaping its understanding of the world through patterns, not through isolated events. And in that understanding, there is something important to remember. Your dog is not just reacting to what happens, it is responding to what it feels, to what it senses, to what exists beyond what you can see. And when it changes, when it becomes more watchful, more careful, more present than usual, it is not random, it is meaningful. It is the dog telling you, in the only way it can, that something is different, that something is not aligned, and that it is trying to find its way back to balance. Quietly, patiently, through behavior that speaks without words, waiting, not for explanation, but for resolution.